there's always a weird scene of an older bearded man stabbing a younger man with a dagger right at the back here. In the Scythian tradition, the wise man, the older man with the beard, is the wise man who's now gone through the process. He's killing his immature younger self. You've left that guy behind. You've now wisened up because the information that you received by going into the underworld has made you older and wiser. These buildings are very much alive. Be careful what you do when you go in there, because you just might get rewarded with something very magical.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Triangle Theory, a show about self-awareness, consciousness, and inner healing, and also about bigger questions behind being a human. We explore ideas that challenges the mainstream and make you think differently about yourself and the whole world.
Today we're joined by a very special guest, Freddy Silva, best-selling author, filmmaker, and one of the leading researchers on ancient civilizations, sacred sites, consciousness, and crop circles. With 9 books, 16 documentaries, and appearances on Gaia TV, History Channel, and BBC, Freddy challenges mainstream history and brings evidence of advanced ancient knowledge. In this episode, we're going to explore a wide range of different topics, from Egypt, megalithic structures, reality behind crop circles, and whether advanced cultures existed long before recorded history. So if you're into ancient mysteries, metaphysics, I know that I am, or hidden knowledge, you're in the right place. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe and follow on Apple Podcasts and Spotify so you don't miss new episodes now dropping every Sunday. We're now releasing weekly, which is a massive achievement for us. And a big thank you to those that have supported us so far. We've got some really excited things coming this year, so please keep your eyes open. Thanks for tuning in, and we hope you enjoyed this episode as much as we enjoyed recording it. Without further ado, please welcome Freddy to the show.
I wanted to start with this story of yours. You mentioned that before you got into this type of work, you went to the Pyramid of Giza, and during that time you encountered, as you call, watchers or guardians of the pyramid. Could you share a bit more of that about that experience?
Well, you're going for the big one right from the right off the bat. Yeah, it was back in the days when I was just learning all my crafts. So it was about over 30 years ago, and I literally was learning everything from scratch. Even though I've been reading books about mysticism and ancient civilizations and stuff, but I never was really into the idea that unusual magic could happen at these places. And I was there in 1999 with a group of people in Wiltshire who they include the CEOs of some major companies, gold medal Olympic people, which I can't mention who they are, a very interesting group of people who go around the world fixing the problems that people leave behind at sacred sites. And one of my jobs was to go to the Great Pyramid and just clean up the mess. And I'm talking about energy here, not about rubbish, just the energy that people leave behind these places. Because these sites are very sensitive, as we discovered later. And so there was we didn't manage to get private entry. So anyone who's been to Giza knows that the only way to get a good time in the Great Pyramid, or any pyramid for that matter, is to pay baksheesh. And you got yourself a couple of hours of private access just to be there and be mindful. And somehow the paperwork went missing. And the whole of Egypt is based on paperwork, lots of paperwork. So most of the group didn't get in. There were just 6 people. There were 2 women and 4 men from our group. And the place was just full of people, kids running up and down the Grand Gallery, making a terrible cacophony. And the building is so acoustically tuned to the point where you drop a pin and it literally hurts your ears. It's a very sensitive acoustic environment. Anyway, we got to the top of the King's Chamber, and I was saying to the other guys, I hope this is not why we came here, because it's really horrible. The atmosphere here really is quite horrible. And the 2 women left. They felt a bit unnerved in there. And so just 4 guys, which is very unusual in these sites. Usually it's mostly a bigger ratio of women who go to these places, oddly enough. And the lights went off, and we're in total darkness. You can't see your hand in front of your eyes. And so one of the guys said, well, why don't we come here and do a little bit of work? And one of the things that we do at these sites is we do a lot of toning, which is we figure out the resonant frequency of the site and figure out what note it would make if I was a piece of rock. And there were sounds that were coming out of me that I've never been able to do since or before. And everybody began to join in, all the other guys. And it was this wonderful melody. I don't know what was going on, but as surely as I can see right now, about 30 people came out of the stones, surrounded us, dressed in these sort of white satin robes. They were very, very tall, and I'm 6'5", and they're taller than me. And you can't see their heads. You can only see them like from here down. Very unusual. And we just kept toning, and I can see them very clearly. And I'm going, this is really wonderful. I've had this, internal dialogue going. And I thought, I hope the other guys can see what I'm seeing. Otherwise, I've either been taking drugs or I'm, have too much of the wacky backy or something, because this is really incredible. And suddenly all these questions were coming into my head. I got so many questions to ask of these people. It never occurred to me to be frightened. It never occurred to me that I might be in some kind of danger or might be getting abducted or something. I'm just not into that kind of stuff. And it was just wonderful. And I felt very comfortable with these people. And I call them people because they're very real on that level of reality. And then about 5-10 minutes later, the lights went on and suddenly, poof, everything's vanished. And there's 4 guys, grown-ups, in the king's chamber, in shock. I mean, you can see that something has happened. And I didn't say a word. I thought, I'll save it till later. So we took turns going into the box. I won't call it a sarcophagus because no one's ever buried there. And 5 minutes in that box, and you disappear. You've left the building, and you come back from what seems like an eternity of traveling, physical travel through space and time, which I won't really go into. It's very personal, but a lot of people have done that, and it really changes when they come back into the body. It changes who they are, and it's as if they've gone on this spiritual quest. And that pretty much is what happened on that day to me. I realized that something's going on in these buildings. Excuse me, the people need to know about. These people are alive. You can interact with them, and it does something for you and to you. And for me, it's been a journey of 30 years of research since then. But the funny thing is, when we left the building, we got back into the sunshine, and you can tell that someone wanted to say something. And I said, all right, I'll be the girly man. I'll be the first one to say it. Did anybody saw what I saw in there? And the other guy says, yeah, well, there were these people that came out of the stones. And the next guy says, yeah, they're dressed in white, they're taller than you. Yeah, and they kind of bowed. Yeah, that's right. So we're all in agreement. We didn't make this up. We didn't go in there asking for an experience. We just went in there to clean the building up. That's all we went there to do. And what happened? So we'll go back into that shock mode of trying to figure out what it is that's happened. And we get together with our fearless, glorious leader, who's an incredible, gifted psychic, and she helps the British police with their inquiries, if you want to call it that. Has a near 100% record of looking for missing people and miscreants who steal cars and things like that. She's the real thing. And she looked at this, and we're like gaga. We're not saying anything. We're obviously out of our heads. And she said, well, wasn't that interesting? You went there to honor the building, and the guardians of the building came out and honored you. Did you enjoy the trip? And I went, so you mean that really happened? He goes, well, of course it did. Why do you think we're doing this? And that's when I quit my day job. I realized there's something here of great benefit to people, because if it happens to someone like me, it can happen to anybody. And I've seen people, scientists, also experience the same process and also be surrounded by the same people exactly in the same dress that I saw. And this is before I even published the information. So, yeah, these buildings are very much alive. So be careful what you do when you go in there, because you just might get rewarded with something very magical.
Mm. And these shining ones, these sort of followers of Horus that you've mentioned, what are their sort of involvement? And when you say sort of developing humans, who could we say that these shining ones are?
Well, when I went back to England, and we're in a session with our fearless, glorious leader, and I actually asked that question. I said, what's this all about? What's going on here? And they were saying, well, people will be used, and I literally mean that, they will be used to write books about this stuff. And you'll discover that once we were in physical form, and we used to call ourselves watchers. Some people call us guardian angels, depending on your particular culture. But we used to be in physical form. We're very tall, and I was writing all this down. I thought, how the hell how are we going to find this out? So, of course, one thing leads to the other. And, a year later of searching through the British Library in London and literally glued to every book that came out of the shelves, I discovered that, yes, they used to once be here in physical form about 12,000 years ago. And they appear in every culture on the planet. So this is now 10 years into the research. I found out in South America from the Aymara, who are one of the oldest people on the planet, up in Lake Titicaca. And they said, oh, yeah, we know about them. They're nicknamed the Shining Ones. And in Persia, they used to call them the Anunnaki, the people of Anu. who always get very bad press, by the way, for all the wrong reasons, which is kind of annoying because they're actually very interesting people and very benevolent as well. And in other parts of the world, they go by the names of the Anunaga, which are the people of the serpent. And it has nothing to do with reptiles. It's to do with the fact that when you understand the laws of nature, which are essentially electricity and magnetism, which flow like serpents, that was the acronym that they were using. It was to let you know that this was your badge of office. So these people, about 12,000 years ago, formed part of a parallel culture that lived alongside human beings. And then after the end of the Ice Age, a lot of them also died. And their time in Earth was also pretty much up. But they also said, once in a while, when things get out of control on Earth and humans are crying out for help through their prayers and their wishes, we tend to incarnate again, and we take on these unusual physical forms of being unusually tall, sometimes with the elongated head, like you find in South America and Egypt. And sometimes we have red hair or blonde hair because we used to have very light skin in the old days. And lo and behold, all of those people, all their skeletons and the bodies are slowly being found around the world. And they are associated with this culture of teachers, benevolent people who guide humanity through their darkest times, to give them a little prompt that they should be doing a little bit better than they are, not to lose hope that humanity is a work in progress, and not to beat yourself up too much about it. It's to give you a little bit of confidence. And they did say that we have been the teachers and the elders in your different cultures around the world. And when our job is done, like you, we die and we go back into the collective. So this is about 5 years of research to actually back up what this channel material was saying, and it's absolutely true. I find these people all over the planet, even in Yucatan. I'm about to leave in about 10 days for the Yucatan. There's a town there called Aceh. Hardly anybody ever goes there. I've never seen tourists ever go there. And sure enough, the local guard that protects the site, and he had an AC/DC T-shirt on. So you're in the Yucatan with a guy with an AC/DC T-shirt from, I think it's from Back in Black album, which is a long time ago,
Nice.
which is showing my age. And I said, I've got that album. So we hit it off immediately, and I speak Spanish. And I said, is there anything that you can tell me about this place? Because it's right next to the biggest pyramid in Yucatan, and nobody knows about it. They all go to Teotihuacan, but it's still there. And I take my group there. And he said, yeah, I've been the caretaker here for decades. And one of my most important functions, which the archaeologists won't know, is that we found the skeletons of these enormous people in the underside of the buildings. I said, really? And I wrote something down. I didn't say anything to him. I said, can you give me a description? Yeah, they're taller than you. They're about so many meters. So I thought, that's about 8.5 feet. I said, that's right. And I just written that down, 8.5 feet. And I said, and they had red hair, right? I said, yes, how do you know? Because I've been researching for them all along. And they were described as being the people that once lived as a group of what we call the gods in this island in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean that they called Atoll, which is where we get the word Atlantis and Atlantic from. So the Maya have that story, and they're very aware that these people were very real in their time, and they were basically the antecedents of the Maya. So the Maya came from that culture.
Just earlier, you mentioned that when you went to the Pyramid of Giza, you went there to clean the mess of the people. What sort of energetic mess were you referring to?
It's basically all the emotions, all the thoughts that go into the building. What we discovered over the last 4 decades from people who've actually bothered to go and research this stuff, especially electrical engineers and physicists. One of the biggest studies was actually at Avebury, since we're talking in Britain right now, and also around Stonehenge. There's one guy called, it was the late John Burke, actually. He actually went around putting electrodes all around Avebury Henge, and he found, kind of very, very long story short, that something happens to the energy field, which is electromagnetic, and partly also to do with the illusion of gravity, which is another side story, but we'll keep it to electromagnetism to keep it simple. And he said, no. At night, all of these monuments, they go to sleep. The energy field gets drawn right down to zero. In fact, there's a missing energy field, like a null energy field. But then something happens just before dawn. The readings of electrical current and magnetic current from the area around Avebury start being attracted to all the stones, and specifically the avenue of stones. And it goes into the actual ditch around Avebury. It keeps circling around and around, like it's collecting itself, like it's trying to wake up from a long slumber, just like a human being. And as the moment that the sun crosses the horizon, a big door, an energetic door, appears between the two massive portal stones at Avebury, which is on the southeast corner of the circle. And all the energy that's been collecting in the ditch suddenly goes through those two stones at twice the rate of frequency that the local surrounding field can handle. And we can't explain that. So the stone circle acts as a kind of an accumulator and an expander of the energy. And they did the same thing at Stonehenge, found exactly the same correlation was happening. And meanwhile, in France, and especially around Carnac and the whole Brittany area, where they have one of the biggest megalithic metropolises on the planet, there was another electrical engineer that also spent a decade as a skeptic looking at all this mumbo jumbo that New Age people were saying. Oh, we talk to the stones and we hug them like trees, they're living beings. And he said, well, are they making it up, or is there some science that we can use to validate all of this? And he published one of the best pamphlets on the subject, which I actually found on the back of a bucket and spade store in Karnak. You know that smell you get from old paper that's been sitting around for a while in a damp environment? And I was walking by this building, I smelt it, and it's like a magnet, just sucked me right into this bucket and spade store. And there's a guy saying, you know, Monsieur, can I help you? I said, no, leave me alone. Went right to the back of the store, and there was this lovely booklet about, I think it was called Les Pierres sont vivants, which means the stones are alive. And I thought, hello, this is interesting. And it literally monitors his research over a decade of monitoring the stones for electrical current. And he said, depending on the shape of the megalith, which could be a menhir, a dolmen, a passage mound, or a stone circle, the energy is attracted to the site and is stored in a different way. So it basically attracts itself to the site. Stone circle acts like a great big battery. The menhirs behave like coils, like you have in a car, and the dolmens behave like capacitors. But the net effect is that every 78 minutes, the energy builds up and then it discharges. So if you're there at the wrong time at the wrong place, like many dowsers tend to be, they'll touch the stone and they'll get one hell of an electric shock. And I know that for a fact because I've also learned how to dowse. And of course, before I knew what the hell I was doing, I would touch the stone out of curiosity and it's like, ow. And you can't feel the forearm for like 5 minutes. So the stones are alive, okay? Now, human beings are electromagnetic by nature. So if you take your thoughts, your emotions, or your intentions into these sites, the stones, which are specially picked for the amount of quartz that they carry, which makes them great piezoelectric devices, your intentions and your emotions are electromagnetic packets of information, and they go straight to the actual stone. Experiments have been done in Princeton here in America, where they actually did this experiment looking at the measurement of human intention to see if it can be measured against a background frequency. And yes, it can be. They even developed a special computer for it. And one of the famous experiments at Princeton was that they took a group of people with the same intention in a room, and they said, look, here's a computer in the middle of the room. It's got a drum beat, and it's going boom, boom, boom. The intention is to see if you can interact with the drum beat and change the attitude of the computer. And it's a peer-reviewed paper. It's still available online. And they actually succeeded in changing a computer. And that's just the power of human intention. Imagine going up to a 50-foot stone or a 400-ton megalith with all that quartz, which is essentially what a computer is. Your intentions go into these places. So when people go into the Great Pyramid with all those thousands of tons of piezoelectric material, and you go in there with all your problems and your aches and your issues, the building remembers everything. I mean, energy doesn't give a damn one way or the other. It's just energy. It just goes either way. So if you go there with prayer or reverence or just humility, it remembers that. And that's how a lot of places around the world, sacred sites around the world, remain alive to this day, because people like us go there with the right intention. We feed it a bit of energy, of positive intention, and this site reacts in kind. But then there are those times when idiots go in there, or people who just don't know any better, and they'll pollute the site and leave their fingerprint behind. A great example is Glastonbury Tour. Many people go there for all good reasons, and then there's always one person that goes in there to mess up the whole thing. And there's groups of people that go there every month to fix up the energy. And you get near the tour and you go, I just don't want to be here for more than a minute. It just feels terrible. And people go to the top, they clean up the place, again, using the power of intention and prayer, and they leave, and people suddenly feel drawn to it again. They reset the whole thing back to zero. So the whole thing is a living energy universe, and the stones are basically the attractors and storers of this energy.
And in terms of the links between these megaliths and the stones and the energy, the purpose of their construction, what would be your sort of guess on that?
Oh, it's not guess.
Or not guess, sorry.
In fact, I'm glad you brought it up, because it's my latest DVD. They don't do DVDs anymore, do they? My latest documentary. I actually spent 20 years collating information and also my own experiences and research, and finally collated the whole thing onto a DVD that concentrates on the three main areas in Europe, which are the biggest concentrations of megaliths on the planet, which are central Portugal, Karnak and the whole Brittany area, and Finisterre around there, and also in northern Scotland, of all places, especially Orkney and the Isle of Lewis. Believe it or not, they have the highest concentration of sites in the whole of the British Isles, at least that we know of right now. But it gives us a parameter in which to measure things by. And what I was amazed by was that people have been doing research on all of these three areas, and a lot of science has been done in these three areas specifically. And I collated the information and found incredible overlaps. That one, the stones were sourced from a long, long way away, as much as 40 miles away. So you think, well, why go for that trouble when there's a perfectly useful stone right here? It does exactly what it needed to do. It gets your attention, but no, they had to go a long, long way away to get a certain type of stone. And the stones that they kept choosing tend up to carrying a lot of magnetite, which is exactly the kind of stuff that you have floating in your skull to begin with. They have a lot of iron. They have a certain type of quartz, and a lot of type of this quartz, which actually acts as a highly piezoelectric material. Not just any type of quartz, but a specific type of quartz. There's a lot of mica and also a lot of feldspar. And when you put these things together, they become kind of an attractor of energy. They start collating information. But that's the only part of the story, because it's the locations that our predecessors found also have something in common. One, and this is almost like a strange joke. They're all erected in some of the most seismically active areas of those regions. So you've got these big stones, and there's a lot of stones, and you're going to put them in a place where they might fall down, because all the earthquakes are always going backwards and forwards. But no, they're designed in such a way that they resist being felled over by big earthquakes, because the center of gravity is such that these stones are lying, literally touching the base of the bedrock, but the weight of the stone is equipped in such a way that it doesn't fall over unless you really get like a 9.0 earthquake, and then you will get things falling over. And on top of that, you also have the fact that they also occupy unusual gravitational hotspots, where because gravity is not even, by the way. Most people think that gravity is gravity. No, there are weak points in gravity, and there are strong points in the gravity field. And all of these sites, all the megaliths, also were chosen because of their gravitational variations. And now we know that when you put all of these things together, that when people walk at these places, if they're if they allow themselves to be influenced, because skeptics, when they go to these sites, they don't want to feel and they don't want to believe anything, and that's cool because they're very pro themselves not to believe anything. And believers will also think that they're going to see fairies and all kinds of unusual things, and they will, but it comes from here, from the need to be validated. But anybody that walks in these places, because you're an electromagnetic being, all that gravity, all of those electromagnetic anomalies will start to work on your brainwave patterns. So you start getting an altered sense of consciousness or an altered sense of awareness. This is why they're also associated with rich traditions of folklore of healing as well, because once you start moving energy through your body, and specifically if you move the iron that flows in the bloodstream, now you're affecting the movement of energy in the body. And when you're ill, what's happening is you have blockages in your energy grid in your body. Not just physiological, it's also energetic. So you've got all these things conspiring to create a kind of technology. And that was the one thing that was all said of what they call the gods. They said they have complete control of the laws of nature. They can bend the rules of nature at will. And I've heard this from every ancient culture on the planet. So we're dealing with the natural technology at these hotspots, but they also happen everywhere around the world, wherever you have major megalithic and monolithic sites.
Wow. Just going back to the guardians and what the watchers. If you call them the guardians, what do you think they're protecting us from?
Ourselves. Yeah, I mean, again, it was a matter of going around asking people whose ancestors were here longer than anyone can know. So the Aboriginal people of Australia, they have memory of meteorite events that happened 1 million years ago. And I'm not using that term loosely. I mean 1 million years. And they've been proven to be correct. People were there to witness meteorites falling in the outback, back when there's a big ocean in the middle of it and forests and everything. And a couple of people from I think it was the University of Melbourne. They went to look at these stories and they found that, yes, it's true. The meteorite is actually there, which means that these people had to have been around for over 1 million years. So you ask people like that. The Aymara in South America, the Waitaha of New Zealand that used to be on Easter Island when it was an archipelago 12,000 years ago. You start collating all of their stories. And even here in America, in the Hopi in Arizona, they have great stories about coming from islands which no longer exist in the Pacific. And the one thing that they always agree on is there was a time when there was hunter-gatherers, for lack of a better phrase, and then there were another parallel civilization of what they described as people who were human-like, but not quite human. I love that phrase.
Yeah.
And they said, yeah, they were like us, but they were much taller, and they had really pale skin. This is way before Europeans even existed, by the way. And they had unusual red hair with green eyes, or they were blonde with blue eyes. And but they were unusual, but they also knew more about mathematics. They knew about the sky. They knew about how to construct things. They knew how to build terraces so that in the Andes, you can actually keep your potatoes from freezing during a frost. So they could actually, get around nature and keep themselves busy and controlled and create a great civilization. Well, they said that at the end of the Ice Age, their civilizations were already in decline to begin with, but the Ice Age finished them all off, and most of them died in this terrible conflagration, which is mostly a collection of tsunami. It wasn't so much of a flood as a big series of tsunami when several meteorites hit the Earth, and we now got the evidence to back that up. So they said that the reason why we respected them and we call them the gods is because a god is nothing more than the spirit that's found in anything in nature. So a glass has a god, water has a god, a plant has a god. And then that's why they were given the name of gods, because they understood the laws of nature, they embodied those rules, and then they applied them in real life. And then they taught them to hunt the gatherers, the few that survived the end of the Ice Age, and that's where we get these stories from in different parts around the world at the same time. And they said that the point was to give humans a chance now to go on their development. The time of the gods is over. As with everything has its own particular time period, but their time was gone anyway. They now give us the accoutrements of civilization and see where we go, see how we run with it. And they'd keep an eye on us from afar. Just because you're dead doesn't mean you can't be useful, because we're talking about subtleties in different levels of reality. They're still keeping track of us to this very day. And they said, once in a while, humans get it completely wrong. They're going down this complete dead end. So we try to intervene subtly by adding information or presenting ourselves in a way that seems miraculous to demonstrate that you're not alone, or we'll provide information or wisdom to certain tribes around the world and watch them implement it. or not, because I mean we have free will down here. But when things start getting a little bit out of control, we try to intervene. And I found this one story about this in ancient Egypt. So now we're at the time of the followers of Horus, whose nickname was the Shining Ones, and they would take over the governorship of Egypt at the end of the Ice Age because they were looking around for a human, a total human, who could take over for them. They didn't want to govern human beings. They wanted to do their own thing and let us get on with our own development. So there was a mutual respect that went on. I've never seen any account from any culture that says they were hierarchical to human beings. Yes, they knew more than we did at the time, but there's no sense of subservience, of worship, or anything. That came a long time later. Our people forgot what this story was all about. So the Shining One's followers of Horus would take over the throne of Egypt until they could find a responsible human who could do it for them, and then they go back to the shadows. So some of them still survived. They were still here in physical form. Not many of them. And they would keep an eye on how things were going. A couple of thousand years would go by, and they would look in and they go, they've discovered that the person sitting on the throne has gotten delusions of grandeur, and now they're turning into these I was going to say megalithomaniacs, but megalomaniacs. So we'll get rid of them because that's not how things work. We're going to go back to the old way of doing things. So we'll take over the throne, find another responsible person to take over the throne, and then we'll get back to what we were doing, whatever that may be. But there was at one point where it's written in the Egyptian traditions that when the followers of Horus finally reached the end of their bloodline and the end of their development, because they had to interbreed, they couldn't do it with humans because it would denature their bloodline. That caused huge problems. And there's one moment in the Egyptian traditions that said, the first pharaoh of a purely human bloodline finally takes the throne of Egypt in 3000 BC, and that was the pharaoh Mena, which, by the way, is an Armenian name, which means the first ruler. So now we get the pure human bloodline taking over things, and sometimes they get it right, and sometimes they get it wrong. So if things go up, they go down. But the net effect is, in every culture where these gods appeared, they were always the teachers. They were always benevolent wisdom keepers. They are essentially the predecessors of the Druid culture and the Essene culture, and they're still honored in that particular way. So these are, again, it goes back to a kind of a group of very unusual sages that basically knew how things work, how things don't work, and they set basically the foundation of the codes of conduct, which we eventually ended up in the Christian tradition as the Ten Commandments.
Mm. I know you've mentioned that, excuse me, that in the King's Chamber where you can almost leave your soul and come back, and people have also managed not to come back, but also with leaving the soul have been able to come back to their body and have these experiences where they can have these ideas and move forward of the world. I just wanted to sort of ask to expand on that in a bit more detail, what it means to sort of leave the soul and come back.
It's the biggest mystery and the biggest tradition of any teaching, any secret teaching on the planet. I was researching this when I was coming across so many notes of people who would go into these secret chambers, restricted environments, restricted rooms, sacred caves, sacred mountains, and they all went there for a goodly amount of time, usually about 3 days, after having joined a cult. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I'm talking about a natural cult of disciples that actually were working towards a deeper mysticism and an understanding of life. And the idea was that in your 3rd year of learning the accoutrements of intellectual discourse, you then learn to apply that in real life. And no matter whether you're in Persia, in China, in Japan, in Polynesia, it was always the same process. And that was that in the 3rd year of learning the mysteries teachings, you then had to apply it in real life. So you had to control fear. You had to learn how to manipulate the energy field of your body to raise the frequency just a little bit so that your electrical current can interact with another type of electrical current at these sites and not be overwhelmed. In other words, it's a bit like sticking your fingers in the electrical outlet and you're going to know it's not going to be good for you. So the idea is to manipulate the body just so that allows you to intersect physically into another level of reality. And it's an incredibly dangerous process. The point being that you would take a poison on the evening that you're supposed to actually undergo this process. And it was called a living resurrection, by the way, in many parts of the planet. Still is, despite the actually, I won't say Christianize it, the Catholicization of that actual concept, because it's completely messed up once the Catholics got hold of that. But that's another story. The point was that you take a poison throughout the day, and there's an actual inscription in several Egyptian tombs about this process. And the idea was to slowly kill you, but not enough to kill you totally. You always become comatose. And at that point, you are taken into a restricted chamber or a cave, and your soul has physically left the body. And I'm not talking about ayahuasca. I'm not talking about, taking some doobies. This is the real thing, where you have an induced near-death experience. And it sounds frightening, and yes, it was. That's why it took 3 years to gain control of fear and your emotional state, because you're going to be facing a challenge. And even with all the written information, all the people they had around you to let you know that you'll be fine, just don't panic, they still were able to get into that frame of mind. Well, perhaps if I don't get it right, I'm not coming back into my physical body. But if you do it properly, you'd come back 3 days later and you're declared risen from the dead, or the risen, or as they call it in India, the raised, compared to the corpses, which are the people that have never gone through this process. And they're still practicing it in Kashmir to this very day. So again, the idea was to go and access another level of reality, talk to this kind of being, gods, unusual people, Jimi Hendrix, it doesn't matter who it is, everybody's over there. And the idea is that, unlike in a dream state, you remember everything that you said and that you've received from the people you've interacted with it in the other world. And when you wake up, find yourself back in the physical body, you are supposed to get back to your daily life and apply the teachings that you've learned in the other world. And this is why it was kept a secret, because if I was to tell you about my personal experience with the other world, it would prejudice your experience when it comes your turn. That's why it was secret. There's no other reason. But there was also a safeguard, because they would watch you. The wisdom keepers that understood this from generation to generation would look at you and observe and say, well, I think he can be trusted, or she can be trusted with the information. They're not going to go telling, some corrupt priest that you can use this information also to manipulate people, which you can. We don't want more megalomaniacs on the planet. There's enough of those already. The idea is that you use this information for the improvement of yourself and the improvement of the community around you. It was always for the highest ideal. So that was why it was well protected. Now, if you go into places like the Great Pyramid, and you go there with delusions of grandeur and to think that you know it all and you've been it all and you've read all the books on this stuff. And it's still not enough, by the way. You've got to actually go through a certain process to get there. I know people who've actually gone in there, paid $14,000, which is the going rate for having the Great Pyramid to yourself for a whole night. And the guards open up the building in the morning and there's a dead guy inside the box, because leaving the body is very easy. I've done that. And I wasn't even looking for the experience. I think someone's watching for me, and I call them the management. They seem to have my best interests at stake, because I need to write about this. I like to write from a personal point of view where I've experienced something, and then I can tell my readers about it. I don't just read about it. It's much more fun and more valid, I think, if I've gone through some process which I wasn't expecting or even knew was possible. And it makes it much more tangible and real for the people who are reading what I write about. But then there are also those people who I've known for years who've gone through the process. They've done the learning, they've done the fasting, the mental preparation, learning the control of emotion. And they came back next morning, and yep, sure enough, they'll say it was absolutely worth every penny that I spent. But I can't tell you what I saw or what I experienced, because it's personal. And I've seen these people become very enlightened people. And there's no sense of ego or anything. They've really learned to harmonize the information within their own life and in their own soul. The most famous person that I can remember who did this in the recent era was Plato, of all people. And again, So he couldn't betray his vow of silence. He actually wrote a lot of books which seemed to most people to be fiction. So he writes stories and conversation between two statesmen. So if you read very carefully the words that Plato was putting into their mouths, it tells you about his personal experience. And you have to read between the lines. It's very fine, very carefully done. But he basically did not betray his vow of secrecy, but he was big on this. And it said, and I quote, the experience of the incubation chamber, which is what they called it in Greece, helped define my metaphysical doctrine. That's an actual quote from Plato. And his friend Pythagoras, he was a junkie for this stuff. He did it 5 times. And he almost blabbed about it. He didn't end up in jail because if you were caught on Sunday in the taverna talking about your experience of going into the incubation chamber and saying, hey, guess what I saw? They'd hold your ass in jail. Again, not because it was illegal. It's just the fact that you're prejudicing people because now that they know what to expect, they're going to go and do the same thing and they expect the same outcome. But Pythagoras is not the other person, and the other person is not Pythagoras. We've all come here to do completely different things as souls. So the best thing is to know, yes, it can be done. It's dangerous, but under the right circumstances, the effects are life-changing. And I think Leonardo da Vinci and Isaac Newton, they both alluded to the fact that they were also practicing this, but they couldn't talk about it because the church had complete monopoly on resurrection, as we know.
So what sort of poison was it? Because it does really sound very similar to psychedelic experience, where you live in your body, you drink a poison. That's how people describe ayahuasca. What sort of chemical was that? Like a plant? What sort of poison they had to drinking?
It depends where you were. There was a lot of, in the Middle East, there was Syrian rue. There was also blue lotus. But these things, they didn't leave the instructions behind. That's the problem.
Sorry.
And there are a lot of pictures of this in many of the walls of the temples of people sort of ingesting blue lotus and things like that. But they didn't leave the actual instructions because there's a certain point where you take the hallucinogenic and you turn it into a poison. Now, I've asked a lot of practicing shaman today, and especially in Central America, and they'll say to me, yeah, it's the ayahuasca retreat. Yeah, it's good. It's good for a lot of issues that people have, but that's not what we're talking about. A lot of the imagery comes from the chemical reaction of the hallucinogenic with the electrical current going through the brain. So a lot of the images are self-generated depending on how in the state in which you go into the actual meditative state. But it's still very helpful for a lot of states. And in South America, they talk about San Pedro cactus, which is a much easier thing. But they'll always emphasize that is not the real experience. If you want to do the real thing where you actually have left the body, physically left the body, there's just a carcass behind, you're going to give us at least 8 months of your life. Better still, give us a year and a bit. Because it takes that long to train. It's a very slow process, but the idea was that you do take an actual poison, a highly diluted version of something that under normal circumstances would kill you. It's a bit like looking at arsenic. If you take a 4% diluted version of arsenic, it's a great healing chemical. But 8%, which is not that far off, is deadly to the human body. So again, this was retained in memory and through word of mouth through the wisdom keepers. It was never written down, which is a bit frustrating, and yet also good because it hasn't been manipulated. But there is a big difference between taking psychedelics and taking the poison to have the experience, and the two are similar. They achieve similar results, but the full out of body experience is the real thing. It's pure.
I think Egyptians used to describe, you said blue lotus. I'm not sure if they mentioned blue lily, where they used to mix wine with some sort of psychedelics to have these different experiences. Yeah.
Yeah, and they also, and later on, they would actually lace it with narcotics like cocaine. The Scythians, who are essentially the people that came from the Armenian highlands and they lived around the Black Sea regions, the people who basically imported the big passage mounds into Karnak, Brittany, and Europe, and also in Britain, all the giants' graves that comes from that part of the world. 80% of those mounds that have been dug up, there's no one buried there, and they're still called burial sites, which it just makes me laugh. It's like, yeah, some places were for burial, but some were done for something completely different, because when you open the building that's completely sealed and you find a box in there that's also sealed and there's nobody inside, obviously it wasn't a burial chamber. And one of the mounds that they found in Siberia, this was about 10 years ago, I believe, they found these gold cups in there, but there's no body. So the first question you ask is, well, pretty stupid tomb robbers that you take away the bones, but you leave the gold cup behind. That something here doesn't make any sense. And there was a scientist that actually had the common sense to take that gold cup and look at the inside of the cup and found that there's a residue of stuff inside it. And they found that, yes, there was a kind of poison in there, which we can't seem to quite figure out what it is, because the cup's been there for over 4,000 years. But there's some kind of poison associated with Syrian rue. There's a lace of cocaine in there as well, and another trace of another herb that they seem to have burned in there to create a kind of a vapor bath. So it's as though you've gone in like a hallucinogenic sauna. You've got this incredible vapor going in there with all of the smoke and cannabis smoke as well. But it was also laced not just with narcotics, but also a poison. And if you look at the outside of the cup, it tells you exactly what was going on. There's always a weird scene of an older bearded man stabbing a younger man with a dagger right at the back here. And if you go down into Greece and Turkey, you'll see, and Crete, excuse me, a little dry here because of the snow, not by the house, but outside.
It's okay.
You'll see the same hunter digging a dagger on the back of the neck of a bull. And in both cases, in the Scythian tradition, the wise man, the older man with the beard, is the wise man who's now gone through the process. He's killing his immature younger self. You've left that guy behind. You've now wisened up because the information that you received by going into the other world has made you older and wiser. Same story in Yucatan, by the way. There are images of chalk, which is this incredible sort of bulbous-eyed feature that you see in the temples at Uxmal. And he's got these younger eyes in front of him. It's a complete reversal. You have an old man with young eyes, because now you can see the world with younger vision. You've given away all the stuff that you've mislearned through life. You've got rid of all your bad habits, and you see the world after the experience with young vision, cleaner vision. That's the metaphor there. And then, of course, in Greece with Theseus and the Minotaur, you're killing the animal nature. You develop your spiritual nature. You've got to kill the bull. That's what the whole thing of Theseus and the Minotaur was all about. So it's the same tradition, same metaphors, slightly different from culture to culture, but the point was the same. Once you access the information in the other world, you bring it back, you're now knowledgeable. You have the knowledge of the gods.
Thinking about like knowledge of the gods, how can we become more aligned with our Asian counterparts? Because I just feel we're so far away from these ancient civilizations that clearly had knowledge to living in accordance with nature. And I just feel that the disconnect is just so much. We're sort of living in this sort of state of amnesia. And from everything that you've mentioned with it all being linked, how can we become more aligned?
That's a great question. And I've been asking the same thing for 30 years. And the nuts and bolts of everything that I've done leads to the fact that we have completely negated our connection with nature. And it sounds like just standard new age mumbo jumbo. Actually, it is absolutely true. Because if you look at the cultures that came before 2000 BC, there's hardly any war going on anywhere. The warring really begins around the end of the Bronze Age, which is when the Earth was showered with a lot of plasma discharges from the sun, which my colleague Robert Schoch has been very good at monitoring. And he said, yeah, that's when the warring really begins, about 1500 BC. In full swing. Everybody, half the earth gets burnt down, especially around the area from Turkey all the way to Egypt. Everything is basically smashed and burned and scorched to the ground. So you go into a fear culture. You go from a lunar culture into a solar culture, a much more masculine culture. And it happens worldwide. And that's when the loss of connection to nature really gets underway. And since then, we've been whining about the fact that things just are not the same as they were in the old days. You know, you notice that. But things go like this all the time. They go up and they go down. But we are getting further and further away as we develop big cities, modern society, AI now, which is the biggest issue and the biggest problem that humanity's ever faced, by the way. It's already being misused. Literally, it comes out of the door and it's already being misused for all kinds of nefarious purposes. And I look back at the old cultures, and I'm not looking at this from with rosy-eyed spectacles. I'm looking at this in a very practical way. How did they keep their cultures going for thousands of years without any issue? In fact, they could even get to the point where they could predict that something was coming out of the sky, like a big rock, or plasma discharges from the sun, because they were great timekeepers. I mean, if you go to the Yucatan, then you'll see that the Maya had something like 14 calendars, and some of them track 80,000 years of time. Well, if you're a farmer, what the hell do you care what happens 80,000 years from now? You're going to be dead. And so going to be all your progeny. So clearly looking at the sky was very important for them. They want to know what was happening and the Earth's place in the bigger scheme of things. Because if you know what's coming out of the sky, you can prepare to hide in caves, take food and water for several weeks, like we found in Turkey. There are caves up there that can house 40,000 people very comfortably. I get the same story in New Zealand with the pre-Maori culture that was there called the Waitaha. They have a great story from about 4,000 years ago when the big, they call it the rain of fire. So it's almost like they've watched this kind of fire coming out of the sky that resembles rain, but basically it's scorching everything. And they knew it was coming, and they're already hiding in the caves. And when they came out, half of the South Island of New Zealand on the eastern side had been burnt to a crisp. So all of these things have to do with contact with nature. You understand how nature works. You're part of nature because you're born from nature. It's not that difficult a logical leap to understand that if you work with nature, you can ride the waves, whether they're good times or bad times, and you learn to survive. And that's what we need right now. And the one antidote that I have, and this comes from personal experience, by the way, the one antidote that I have is visit the sacred places, because that's where contact with nature, where the veil between the worlds, is very, very thin. So in Britain, we have so many of these places, and people still go to that this very day. Avebury is still such a great place to go and hang out. I can't tell you how many hundreds of times I've been there. I'm still learning stuff about Avebury, despite the fact that I used to live around the corner for many years. And it never ceases to amaze me. And I always come back rejuvenated, alive, and with new ideas. I mean, I got to the point where I could go into any of these sacred places, go there with a question and expect nothing. If you go there expecting something, you'll get it, and it's coming from your ego because you want validation. You want to feel special. I go there and I learn very quickly that if you do that, you might as well forget what's coming to your head for the last half an hour. Go there with a question. Say, I really need to know about this. How does this work? Go there expecting nothing, step over the sheep, walk around a little bit, and suddenly you get these visions and voices in your head, and you thought, that's interesting. And then you go to the British Library and you start researching, and it's all there. And the idea is that you use these sacred places as a kind of astral reference library. And that's what people like us were doing thousands of years ago. They would connect at these places in a state of reverence or meditation and extract information from a living library universe and bring it down into your consciousness and then apply it, tell the tribe what's going on. That's how they maintain that connection. Year after year, century after century, didn't always get it right. I mean, Earth is not supposed to be a place where you come to get it right. You come here to experiment, and hopefully you'll do it more better than you did more worse by the time you actually, leave this mortal coil. And that's the biggest antidote that I found. Venerate the sacred places, where it's a standing stone, a passage mound, Stonehenge. You've really got to pay for this private access, and make sure you do it on your own because it's so polluted with consumerism and tourism that it's not the same that it used to be. I remember going there in the middle of the night when a couple of guards used to guard it, and they used to have the little shed on the side. You have to go under the road to get to it. And these are ex-SAS troops, by the way, who were making a little bit of extra money when they're retired. And they were lovely people. They would tell you about the most incredible things that they saw there. And you can see that they've developed this spiritual bent, despite having been involved with, getting rid of Argentinian soldiers in the Falklands and stuff like that. They don't talk like military people. They talk like mystics. And I love listening to their stories, but then they'll say, well, don't publish this because we had to sign the Official Secrets Act because we're not supposed to tell you what we see here, but before you go, I want to tell you about this. They were very talkative and they're lovely people.
They became the guardians of the
And they
site.
became the guardians of the science. And I've seen this with scientists as well. There's one guy that I know, and I won't mention his name to protect the fact that he has to be allowed to publish, because once he starts talking about mysticism, he'll never be published again. He's a genius, quite well known, and I respect that. And he says, Freddie, he actually lived not far from a very famous stone circle in the Lake District, by the way. He says, Freddie, there's moments where I'm doing these experiments at these sites with, lots of equipment and stuff. And I know I'm being watched, and I turn around and I get this sense of an image of a very tall person dressed with these long white robes. I said, oh, I know who that is. And he's developed this incredible mystical thing, but he's still a very hard-nosed scientist, but he can't talk about it. But amongst us, he opens up and he tells you about the most incredible things that to spend so much time developing the right equipment to validate the invisible universe. When he goes into these places, he knows it's there, but he can't talk about it because he'll be poo-pooed, he'll be ridiculed. So again, and I've come to the conclusion after so many thousands of sites that I've venerated over the decades and written about them and experienced them, that they were built literally as an insurance policy. And in fact, the Egyptians, after that came out of my mouth, I was reading an account on one of the, and I won't call them tombs because no one's buried in most of the pyramids. It was the chamber of Tutmosis III, and is the only place in the Valley of the Kings where nobody is actually buried. So think about this. Valley of the Kings was built exactly to house dead bodies. Absolute given. But if you go right to the very top, to the very end, past all the tourists taking all their selfies, I am the only person that I know who takes the only group of people that I know into that chamber where the guy is buried on the other side of the hill. There's no one actually buried there. And when I found the extracts that were reproduced from the hieroglyphs by two Danish historians, and they just wrote what was on the walls. They didn't judge what was on the walls. And it said, whoever understands these mysterious images is a well-provided light being. Always he can cross into the other world and back. He has a foot in both worlds. He can talk to the living and the discarnate alike. Proven to be true 1,000,000 times. So whoever was using that chamber, because when they found it sealed and the box was also found sealed with nobody inside, nobody in there. They left the instructions on the walls. And the idea was that you connect with the laws of nature, you become understanding of the laws of nature, you embody them, and then you make the world a better place. So that is the antidote, in answer to your question, is to go to these places that were built as an insurance policy for times when we would forget our connection to the divine. People tend to think that God is something out there. No, God is in here. It's even Jesus Christ said this. The temple of God resides inside. So he's actually an honorary Buddhist, if you think about it. He couldn't be further from the truth because, we're reporting back to the source at every given moment. I'm sure the source right now is even watching what we're talking about right now because that's how it works. But we forget about this because your parents will hit you in the back of the head and they'll say, stop talking about fairies. They don't exist. And you go, okay, I'm getting tired of being hit on the back of the head. I won't see fairies on anymore. And boom, the magic's gone. Or you go to school, you get beaten up because you're talking about goblins and all kinds of wizards and stuff. And they want to talk about beating up people, roughing people up, dating girls and doing all kinds of silly things. So you forget about it. And once you go into the ordinary world of getting a salary and having to pay the bills, you get distracted. So what was the antidote? Again, the antidote was to build these places so that when you forgot who you were and what you can do, you can look at a standing stone or a passage mound or a sacred hill like Silbury Hill and say, oh, that's the X that marks the spot, because we now have the technology to measure the energy of these sites. So I know where to go. I can sit there in a state of grace and I can say, what's this all about? What am I looking for? And just see what pops up. And once you do this again, just like driving a car, you get better and better at it. And it becomes second nature. And before you know it, you've connected with all the guardians that are around you right now, every minute of the day. And that distance between you and the invisible universe becomes very paper thin. And that's how people like Isaac Newton came up with these ideas. That's how Leonardo da Vinci came up with a lot of this stuff. And if you read through their notebooks and read between the lines of what they were writing, yeah, I know how they were able to achieve the miraculous in their lifetimes, because they were also doing exactly the same thing. If you go to northern India today and talk to the fakirs there, they'll say, yeah, we got something called Kriya Yoga. It does exactly the same thing. You don't have to go to a sacred site. You already are the sacred site. And if you know how to manipulate the energy field around your body, and which takes you about 6 months to learn to do it properly, you're in control of your own energy field. And now you can actually intercede in your own behalf into the next level of reality. And they're serious about this. And they're still practicing it to this very day. So I really do believe that all of these places that they built around the world using enormous stones, and they went to enormous troubles to build this, were designed that they would last until our age. Exactly when we're asking this precise question. How do we get back to the source? How do we connect with things that make our life better? Yeah, we built these things using 400-ton rocks so that, A, you know where they are, and 2, they wouldn't be destroyed very easily.
It's interesting you mentioned Leonardo da Vinci, Pythagoras, Plato, because something that I do remember reading about Nikola Tesla, that he got a lot of his ideas from the entities that he can't really explain, and from the energy sources. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, I do. In fact, it's kind of funny. When I was writing my first book on crop circles, I came across a lot of Tesla's work. I don't know how or why, what the connection was. I was stupefied to find out that so many of the diagrams for his works on electromagnetism and anti-gravity work that he was doing, the diagrams are exact mirror images of many of the early crop circles. And I'm talking about the real stuff, not the stuff that was made by people years later, because they were making a lot of nonsense after Doug and Dave came out with their ridiculous story, which was debunked, by the way. So I was, it helped me to understand where his mind was. He was not local. That guy was not local. Even as a youngster, you can tell there's a soul in there that's very old, that's connected to something else. Even today, when you walk around, sometimes they're 8-year-olds that surprise the hell out of you. It's like, who the hell's in that body? They know more than they should be at that age. And I think Nikola Tesla was one of them. I think he understood the rules of nature and he embodied them. And he wasn't the only one, by the way. There was someone quite like him in Florida called Edward Leedskillen. He's a tiny little guy. He's about 4'10". He built the Coral Castle, as they called it. And he also talked about very similar processes that Tesla was talking about using the illusion of gravity and using sound frequency. In fact, a lot of the equipment that they had around them was to do with sound generation. And both Tesla and Leedskillen did suggest that the Egyptians totally understood this because they understood harmonics, geometry, and sound. And that was the key to moving the stones in the first place. And I'm a great believer of that because I've heard that story in so many countries around the world. You go to South America and you'll talk about sound and they'll say, oh yeah, the stones would move through the air. Little kids could just push the stone because they were literally hovering over the telluric currents that flow from A to B, just like we have arteries. The planet also has its invisible tracks of energy, and it's absolutely true. So the idea was to look at the resonance of a stone, do the counter resonance, and then the quartz in the stone raises itself. You just push it along the currents of energy, and you build yourself a temple overnight, which is the words that they said. The temple was built overnight. Tiwanaku was built in the blink of an eye. The pyramid of Uxmal and the magician's pyramid literally overnight, and they did it to the sound of a voice from a magician king. If these people who were supposed to be quite rudimentary never spoke to each other across the planet because they were, hunter-gatherers, they lived very closely together, how do they have the same stories, I wonder? So they have to be talking from experience, and the experience that connects all of them was the fact that they were all taught by the same gods, which go by exactly the same names all around the planet.
Yeah, I've heard of these magician kings where they almost chant and use these sort of vibrational, essentially, like, as you're mentioning, these sounds where they could lift the block and move it into place.
Yeah. There was an actual experiment that was done at Princeton. I remember when I was writing the Divine Blueprint, my second book, I asked exactly the same question. And the people, unbeknownst to me at the time, I was in the middle of chapter 8, and then suddenly I found out that they were doing exactly the same thing for the same reasons. Is it true that they could have actually observed this and they memorized the idea that if you throw sound at these stones, they levitate? Well, they finally also came to the conclusion that the stones that they used were of a certain type of quartz, which they are, and they found that piece of quartz, and they basically took a little bit about this big, and I think it's still on their website, the video that shows the piece of quartz inside the tube in a vacuum, and they were experimenting with sound frequency and amplitude and experimenting because we didn't know what frequency they were using. And lo and behold, in the middle of the video, the piece of quartz just starts to levitate, and it's right there.
Wow.
So now we know that they weren't making it up. And why would they? Why would they make this stuff up? Because back then, to survive, you didn't want to make stuff up, because if you invent stuff, it could be the demise of your culture. It could be the demise of your tribe. You've got to observe, see how things work, and replicate it. So I'm a big believer in the fact that these people really did understand the laws of nature. And in fact, there's one, I think it's in Karnak, there's an actual hieroglyph that shows what looked like 4 priests holding one of those metal sticks that you find in the Egyptian museum with a little animal head. And if you look at the stick at the bottom, it looks like a tuning fork, because they were. And if you're able to actually tap them, back in the day when you can pay enough people at the museum and touch the stones and go boom, and each one of them is tuned to a specific note. And I'd read about this in a lot of early Masonic books. And the Masons themselves originally came from Egyptian studies to begin with. And I thought the magicians were also musicians. And I wondered, did they have control of the rules of nature and sound, that they could understand the frequency of a block of stone, hear the frequency, and they would tap it, the stone, with these special sticks, and the stone would then reverse its polarity, and it would lift. Because if you remember your science lessons, which I know were dreadfully boring at school, but there was one great experiment where you used to take a metal bar and you hit it with the piece of wood, and the poles would swap around. The positive and negative poles would swap around. Not that difficult, actually. The rest is just application and know-how. And I'd read about this on the walls of Edfu a short time later. They talk about when the gods were in just creating the original temples in Egypt, and they were there in 10,500 BC, by the way. And that's validatable because of the orientation of Edfu to a specific constellation with which the gods were associated with. And it talks about how when you're trying to create a sacred site from ordinary site, you first have to kill the enemy serpent, which means getting rid of all that bad energy. That's what the serpent symbol was all about, electromagnetism. So once they got rid of that, they would then define an area for the temple. They would bring in certain mystical people to work with water. They didn't just put water at the foundation of the temple. It was a certain water that was charged. And they would use their intention to do a special type of water. They called it the special water that sanctifies. That was the exact translation. And then you get the 4 algors, which are basically the people that set up the foundation of the temple. And there they are with the big sticks, okay? And the point was to go to the actual stones and tap them in a certain way that would then imbue them with energy and purpose. And then they would have another group of gods that were approached with the geometry for the temple, and then a whole bunch of other groups that would bring in other energy to be impregnated into the actual stones. Essentially, the rules of temple building are written right on the walls of Edfu. So again, that concept that you can actually manipulate the rules to make the impossible quite simple. And I remember a very old story that was still taught in it was Jordan and also Lebanon about 2,000 years ago, that comes from mouth to mouth from the Egyptians. And it took about a time when there's a pharaoh who was trying to show off to his acolytes at the court, not a particularly nice person. And he said, I want to show you something really special. Bring in the god Horus, or Hor, as they called him in the old days. And it was a title, by the way. There was a lot of Horuses and a lot of Osiris, a lot of Isis. It's a bit like saying Christ. Well, Christ just means anointed. This could be a million people that are anointed. So it's not just one person, it's many. So Hor comes in, and the Pharaoh says, show my colleagues here what you can do with your magic. And he goes, oh, really? Do I really have to show off? Okay. So Horror just utters a sound for a prolonged amount of time, and this enormous block of stone raises itself above the heads of all the people at the party, and the party fled in horror because they felt it was dark magic, that this guy had control of a piece of rock that would fall on their heads if they gave him a hard time, which I'm sure he would have if they did. But and he just goes back. It's like, have you had enough now? Are you impressed? Can I go back to my day job now? And off he goes. He lowers the stone, poof, and off he goes. So, and this is still being taught throughout the folklore of the Near East only 2,000 years ago.
Wow.
Amazing.
Which makes travel so much fun.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
I always joke, forget about academics, and I mean that kindly. Forget about the academics sitting in a dusty office. Go hang out with people whose ancestors were there to experience these events, because they have the best stories. Most of my research starts there. And then I get to the academic stage and the science stage, and they actually overlap quite well. But if these people were around, their ancestors were around to listen, hear, and see and experience the events, well, who are we to know, say otherwise? And that's a very clear path of research in my book.
I just wanted to mention the sort of the laws of nature and the information that, say, like Tesla or Plato and all these incredible people throughout life have had access to. Do you think the information is always there? It's just about having your mind in a certain state of consciousness in order to access it?
That's a great question. I don't know. I think you'd have to go back 10,000 years, million years. We don't know. There could have been a dinosaur civilization for all we know. I mean, it has been postulated. It's just that we're looking for signs of a civilization relative to ours, which is completely wrong. I'm sure they didn't have computers back then, but they had another kind of technology. I think both is correct. I think it was a learned experience that you did from working with nature. If you go to the Amazon today and you look at how the shamans work, and they'll go to a certain tree out of a million trees, and they'll go, that one. If we do this to that, and we distill the bark in a certain way, you can have a really great time and see some really weird stuff. Well, how would they know that the bark of that specific tree and no other tree is a potent hallucinogenic, and it also has healing abilities? No, you can do it by experience or by trial and error, which is not a good idea when it's a poison, because if you take the wrong type of bark and you chew it to like 90% dilution, you're dead. And you only find out after 8 people have died, that 10% of dilution actually works, which is a bit of a strange humor, but I'm sure that they also went through that. Or they did it by our God-given ability to also be in tune with the elements around you. This is what it means by being psychic and being intuitive. Now, that's where your inner tuition comes from. You can literally walk around anywhere and you tap into the energy or the God of a plant, and you go, oh, that's interesting. The God of the plant is telling me that if I brew it in a certain way, it will heal cancer. Okay. I totally believe that is also possible. You're communicating with an element of nature, a biological system of which you are part of the same family, and you just have your conversation in a very intimate way. Again, the more you do it, it becomes second nature, and people are still doing that around the planet. And then the other one is stuff that's just handed down over time and space. So if let's say, for argument's sake, that there was a parallel civilization here before the end of the Ice Age, which there's so much evidence to back up the fact that there was. They had learnt this from God knows how long, hundreds of thousands of years, and then they taught it to us. So there are 3 lines of thought here that are absolutely possible. Trial and error, an intuitive process that you communicate with the rules and you become the actual element with which you're trying to interact with, which is where shamanism really comes from. You become the animal or the plant. You wear the skin of the animal, as in Native American tradition, to become that animal so you can communicate with that animal and find out how can you communicate with a wolf to make sure it doesn't kill you. And they're very good at doing that. Or it's an inherited information whereby it goes from wisdom keeper to wisdom keeper, which is how the druids ended up with all their information. And you can date all that stuff all the way back to the druid methodology. You can basically trace it back to the Essenes in the Near East and what they were learning in the Near East in 2,000 years ago. You can be traced back to India in 6,000 BC. And from there to Japan in 8,000 BC. So it's a learned process. So I think there's three things going on here as to how you can actually get the information. Or UFOs, that's the fourth one.
Yeah.
Space Brothers, if you want to go there. And I think we're not alone. I think it would be a huge waste of space if we're alone. And as talking to my Native American friends, I can be here for hours talking about information that the star people would relay to to us, and they're very matter of fact about it. I was having a quiet drink with Clifford Mahuti, who passed away recently. He was a Zuni elder. He had a great sense of humor. And he said, "Oh yeah, no, the star people, no, they're still coming. The Space Brothers, whatever you want to call them, and they come around as your neighbor comes around every 3 weeks for a cup of tea and a biscuit, and we'll sit down, we'll explain what we've been up to. They'll explain what they've been up to, and then they'll always leave a little bit of information for us to ponder over." I heard exactly the same story in the Easter Island in New Zealand. That back in the day, 12,000 years ago, they said, "Yeah, the gods used to show up. This time, not in a spaceship, but in an actual catamaran, which could hold 200 people. And you can still see them being built today in Samoa and Tonga. And they'll say, oh, yeah, the design hasn't changed for thousands of years because it worked." And the gods used to come here from the big land in the east, which was South America, and specifically Tiwanaku, which means the city of the shining people. And they described the gods as being very tall, red-headed, light-skinned, and whenever they appeared on Easter Island, back when it was a series of islands, so it's before the end of the Ice Age, they said, yeah, they would sit down with us and said, look, we're on the way to the birthplace of the gods, which is a specific place in the South Island of New Zealand, and I've been there 6 times. Put it at the top of your bucket list. It's incredible. And they said, yeah, we come here to get some fish and some fresh water. And while we're here, we'd like to teach you about the stars or about mathematics. Or what else do you need to know? And they would put the information metaphorically into 3 different baskets. They call them the kete of knowledge. Have you ever seen the images of the people in Sumeria holding those man bags?
Yeah.
I have, yeah.
Those are the kete. The person that holds that bag is the wisdom keeper of the tribe. For whether it's deserved or not, it depends on the political moment, because a lot of people associate themselves with that symbol to make themselves superior. But by and large, the person that holds the kete is the container in which the knowledge of the gods is held. So it's a metaphor. You see the same 3 bags, by the way, carved on pillar 52, I believe, of Gobekli Tepe for exactly the same reason. So the grandmothers used to take the information from the 3 different groups of gods, put them in each basket, and each basket represented the belt stars of Orion, because they said at one point that's where the gods came from, and a long time ago that's where humans came from as well. And I wrote that down as an anecdote, and then I heard it for the 2nd and the 3rd time from Japan and also from South America as well. So it's more than idle conjecture. But the idea was that all of these people, whether they were aliens in flying ships or the, how do they call them in the Southwest? The flying shields, that's what they call them down there, or actual physical watercraft. They're incredible seafarers, apparently. The matter is that the information was also given to us from word of mouth because of experience.
Amazing. Yeah, I was watching this clip recently of they showed images of sort of aliens or depicted sort of drawings of aliens to shamans, and these shamans were like, "Oh no, these are our brothers. We see them often," and they took it very seriously. They said, "Yeah, they live below us and they live above us," and it was a fantastic I can't remember the name of the guy that did that clip, but it was really interesting.
Oh, I love talking to people like that. I mean, and again, why would they lie? It's not in their best interest to lie about this. They're not looking
Yeah.
to be more important than anybody else. They're looking for financial remuneration. They're just speaking, plainly. In fact, when I was having a chat with Clifford, he said, "What's the weirdest thing that's ever happened in your life?" I said, "Well, we go to the ships come in flying in every couple of weeks at special times of the month because they have to work with the laws of nature of the Earth as well, and that's how they get through time and space. And they haven't revealed that yet for good reason. We don't want to pollute their lifestyle because we've done enough already around the Earth with all the satellites and the space junk and the moon. So they're pretty smart." And he said, he used to work for NASA, by the way, Clifford. And he said, well, there was a guy that used to work with me, big guy, redneck kind of guy, drove a big Ford F-150 truck and said, I want to see them aliens. I said, okay. As Native Americans do, they're lovely. They're such a humorous, wonderful. Like, okay. And so we went to the edge of the mesa, and so about 11:30 at night, when things begin to happen, as you know. And I thought, yep, that's when things begin to happen. The first of the flying shields comes by, a couple of 100 feet at eye level along the mesa, and you've never seen a grown man run for his truck so fast, disappearing in a cloud of smoke. And next morning at the water fountain at work, he wouldn't make eye contact. And he says, so when are you coming over? I said, I'll be there next week, Clifford. I got so many questions. You're not afraid? Not in the slightest. Why would I be afraid? If they wanted to kill me, they would have done it by now. And then Clifford keels over and dies of old age the following week. So, damn it.
Yeah.
Very selfish of him.
Do you think these space people, or the Watchers, as we call them, are related I mean, they are related, but how they are related to these crops that we discover?
The crop glyphs, they're intimately related, at least in the original time when they were first appearing. You have to understand that the crop circles have been around for at least 300 years. And in the 1800s, I found a lot of cases of policemen in the south of Britain and farmers, and even one politician, I can't remember who he was. He was an MP for Dorset, I think. They all wrote in the local papers, yeah, we saw these interesting tubes of light coming down, and the crop rotated in about 15 seconds and it flattened it, but there was nothing damaged. I went over, I heard this high-pitched sound, and lifted up the plants, and they literally snapped back down as though they're being made molten. The wheat was made molten, and then it rehardened in its horizontal position. An actual quote. Well, in the late 1980s, when the phenomenon began to really appear all around Britain and in 29 countries, we found exactly the same information from 80 eyewitnesses. And that's when my good friend, the psychic, happened to be working on the origin of Silbury Hill. And she accidentally, and she's a trance medium, by the way, she's actually left her body and something else is coming in. We had to transcribe the information that's coming through her because she has no memory of it when she comes back into the body. It's incredible stuff. And a lot of it I can't really talk about because it's I'm sworn to secrecy about some things that I can't talk about. So I'm going to honor that. But the one thing that I remember very clearly is that when she was first reading the transcript of what came through about the origins of Silbury Hill, someone else came in, another consciousness came in, which sounds completely different to what she was channeling. And they said, well, we are a collective. We call ourselves Watchers because we can only intervene. We can't directly influence the outcome of humanity, but we will be seeding information into the Earth's grid with signs and symbols which will help humanity evolve their consciousness and also get themselves out of this predicament that you got yourselves in. Of course, they were talking about climate change, political crisis, and so forth, this bottleneck that we now find themselves in. And we'd have about 30 years to get our act together before they said, Earth is going to show you who's boss. Little did we know in 1980 they were talking about climate change and the extremes of climate that are happening right now. So they were going to input ideas into the Earth's grid. And I'm trying to remember the actual channeling. They said, we will use people to actually unravel the information in the symbols. And we're going to put ideas into the heads of some of your scientists. And they think they will actually, through their imagination, come up with these new ways to rid you of fossil fuels. And when I was reading all of this. My first book really was done to find the science to back up the channel material, and I succeeded. It took me a couple of years, but I succeeded because it showed that the science and the mysticism really are working hand in hand here in this particular topic. And one of the things that the Watchers were very clear about was that we're giving you information to stabilize the earth. Okay, so we're talking to the earth directly as an organism to buy you time to get you to understand you're in the middle of massive change. And if you're prepared, you will ride out the changes and you do it, heroically and elegantly. And if not, you're all going to die because the earth periodically has to shift, it has to evolve. And this has happened many, many times in past history. If you ask any of the Indian people and also the Native American people and any ancient culture, they'll say, yeah, the earth goes through periodic change. And if you're not prepared, you die. And if you're prepared, you live. That's the way it's always been, the way it always will be. The second one is that they were adding healing codes. So they were adding a healing modality. And that's when we began to take note of people who were going into crop circles as skeptics. And they were coming out healed of whatever condition they'd been suffering from 10 years. And this was documented. There was thousands of cases. And we developed a healing system, which is still on my website to this very day. I've never advertised it ever. People find it on their own accord for that reason. So it's a healing modality based on the concept of resonant therapy, or radionics, as we call it today. So that's another thing that we developed out of that. But the other one was the fact that they said, we've given you the blueprint for a machine that defies the illusion of gravity. That's the exact word. Gravity is an illusion. And that's what Tesla was saying as well, by the way. And the Egyptians certainly knew about it. And that's what Isaac Newton also said. The Egyptians mastered the concept of gravity. I'm not the first to do this. And so the picture that I chose for the cover of the book, which I had a huge argument with the publisher about, and it led to a 3-day standoff, like a Mexican standoff, as we call it here, where they wanted a much more dramatic picture. I said, no, I know what that picture does. I know what that symbol does, because I won't tell you how I found out. That picture has to go on the front of the book. It's a very influential picture. So for 3 days, no communication between you and the publisher, and I'm running out of money. I gave up my career to do this. Huge leap of faith. I lost my marriage, my house, my friends. So I wasn't going to back down. But 3 days later, I was sweating, and I thought, my God, I've given up my entire life, and I'm about to blow it because of one silly picture. But I knew it wasn't silly. And they went with my idea. And years later, about 20 years later, I was doing a conference, a UFO conference, actually, in Nevada, of all places. And or was it California? It was Palm Springs, California. And I was picked up at the airport by a NASA engineer and sat down. I said, thank you very much for picking me up. That's very nice. Saves me $30 on a taxi. Oh, my pleasure. I always wanted to talk to you, by the way. In fact, a lot of us want to talk to you. Why? Because we love those exotic numbers that you put in your book on crop circles and the pictures. And I said, okay, tell me more. So I don't want to sort of preempt this stuff. And he said, well, we took a liking to the picture on the cover of your book. Oh, yeah? Yeah. And specifically those angles that look like errors. They're not errors. Perhaps, I don't know. Well, we built it as a 3-dimensional model, and it gets to defy gravity. I said, thank you very much. You just proved exactly what the channeling material gave us.
Wow.
And he was taken aback, and he said, that was channeled? I said, yeah, but we couldn't say that. But I was told I didn't realize they were actually addressing me, because they said, someone will be used to write a book about this. And I thought, great, someone could be writing a book about this. I didn't realize they were talking about me. They could have been a bit more direct. And I said, no, that picture, I put it there because what I knew, it was exactly to put the idea into the heads of scientists. And up to this moment, you thought that you were the ones who were getting the information. That, yeah, we thought we were really clever. Didn't realize this has come from something else. And they're not the only ones. There was another group of scientists in London and Australia that have done exactly the same thing. They're now just buying their time politically to bring out the information, because if you defy gravity and you've got anti-gravity devices like cars flying across the landscape, that's $1 trillion industry that you're going to put out of business. You know what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
I remember the guy that developed the hydrogen-powered car in Seattle back in the 90s. He gets run over by his vehicle twice. Okay, not once, twice, after he goes on television to say, I just got a speeding ticket to prove that my car does 80 miles an hour on, water vapor. So you've got to be very careful with this stuff. But I'm very excited that the channeled information has translated into fact and is being applied for the betterment of society. So despite what you see and all the darkness that's going on right now politically, and climatologically, the more I travel around the world, the more good news I see, actually. You don't get to hear about it. I spent enough years in the media to see how it works, and there's no real nefarious movement going on in the media, not unless you're doing with extremes, like extreme far right or extreme far left. Now you got propaganda. If you stay near the center, I would always, and I was working in London at the time as a creative director in advertising, so the way I saw the whole thing was that we tend to publish a lot of bad news because it creates tension, and tension creates sales. People buy a newspaper because there's tension in a headline. It's not because they're doing it nefariously. It's because people are addicted to tension. Humans are addicted to tension. And if you think that I'm crazy, well, look at your album collection and find out how many musicians have written positive songs when they're happy. Not many of them. The greatest songs usually come from tension or from a space of darkness in your life. One that comes to mind is Eric Clapton. Unfortunately, that occasion when his son fell out of a hotel window and died, terrible tragedy, wrote the greatest songs of his life, just to illustrate the point that humans, whether it's because of a fail-safe system that is there to protect you from harm, we are attracted to chaos. We are always watching for chaos, maybe because of self-preservation. So it's not a judgment call. It's not a right or wrong thing. We are looking for that. So the media picks up on that and goes, okay, let's publish, chaos and tension because that's what they want to read. There was a newspaper that I think it was up in Derbyshire in the 1920s, and it survived for about 10 years, and they published nothing but good news, and they only survived for a decade because people got fed up of reading good news. Again, just to make my point.
It's insane. It's insane to think that we're not only addicted to sort of tension and I suppose like bad
negativity in general.
Yeah, negativity, but like also violence as well. Like it seems to be sort of what I see is like this need for, as you say, like just anything that gives us the mindset to put ourselves in a position where we can maybe isolate ourselves. And even now with technology as well, like I find that even more disconnecting.
Exactly. In fact, if you look at a lot of the stories when the gods were interacting with humans and we're getting the accoutrements of civilization, that's actually very pertinent because they said, well, back then we used to, do what animals did. We used to sort of have sex with animals, and we didn't have any clothes. We didn't even know how to build shelter. We had to live in caves. We'd drag women by the hair and beat the crap out of them. And then the gods show up and said, maybe you should eat vegetables. In fact, all the gods were vegetarians, by the way, which means I'm never going to be a god in my lifetime. I've got to have my regular amount of meat here and there. I'm learning. I'm slowly divesting from that. But the point is that every culture talks about them giving us the accoutrements of civilization, the codes of conduct, how to become better people. And I think there's something to be said for that. So if we started getting into war and fighting and doing all of this, nothing good will ever come of that. That's just the lack of understanding and working with fear. One of the most famous stories that we know of from the Book of Enoch, which is when the bastard watchers, I mean that literally, because that's the natural quote, the bastard watchers that defied the rules and went down and had sex with human women and then taught human beings how to make weapons and kill each other. That's where we get all these stories from about how the renegade watchers, it wasn't all of them, there was a small group of them that defied orders not to hang out with humans and teach them the wrong things. We don't know why they did it. It's a mystery. And that's where you get that sort of moment where you see that there are good things being done with humans, and we were being taught the right way to behave so that we can evolve as spiritual beings. But then there was that other group that also was doing some very nefarious things. It is funny though that we are very much attracted to that negativity and that dark side of things. It's much easier, I think. It's a lazy way out. It's much easier
Yeah.
to destroy than it is to build anything. I mean, I can, to go out in the street and tell someone, look, there's a better way of planting a garden where you get crops to grow in the winter. That takes a lot of effort, and it can be done, by the way, especially if you're in the Andes. But if I want to go out there with a hammer and kill someone, oh, it takes 2 seconds. Dead easy.
Mm.
You can destroy a building with a stick of dynamite, but building a temple, that takes ages. So again, it's the easy way out. And there's no shortcuts to enlightenment. That's the whole story here.
Do you think all the comets that destroyed the planet time and time again and destroyed all these civilizations that lived before us, do you think that's accidental or part of larger cosmic cycle or plan?
I have to defer to what the old scriptures were saying on this one, because if you start correlating the older scriptures like the Vedas and the Native American prophecies and the Maya prophecies, which, by the way, come from another culture called the Itch, which lived on an island called Atoll, where we get Atlantis from. They're very much aware of the fact that there was a big island, and that's where their group of gods came from. All these stories agree, and they talk about the different kinds of ages. And some of them are dispersed by natural conflagration, usually to do with either huge amounts of water swelling out of the oceans. In other words, seismic activity or incoming meteorites. They call them burning mountains, by the way. That's how they refer to the meteorites. And sometimes it's fire that comes out of the sky, and that can come from plasma discharges from the sun when there's high sunspot activity, or, as I discovered, when the Earth passes through the through the tail of a comet. The tail of a comet has the exact chemical composition of petroleum. All it needs to ignite is for the Earth, with all of its oxygen, to go through the tail, and boom, it sets it off in a big fireball. And in the Pacific, they got tons of stories about rain of fire that suddenly comes out of the sky and everything gets burnt to a crisp. So a lot of these things are very periodical. It goes back to the fact that the ancients were very big on observing the sky and the turning of the mill of the sky. Every 26,000 years, you complete an entire galactic year. And in those 26,000 years, they're microcycles. And that's just why they're obsessed with the huge spans of time. They wanted to make sure that we today would get that point, that we have to be prepared, because luck favors the prepared. That's what it comes down to. Otherwise, you've accumulated millions of years of experience, and then you die because of ignorance. And I really find a lot of validity in that story. But if you look at some of the strangest stories around the Mediterranean to do with the last fall of Atlantis, that talk about also that there were two things happening here in the third fall, which was everybody got very complacent. Everybody understood how things worked, how to manipulate everything, and there was no one to do the basic work. No one wanted to clean the toilet. No one wanted to go and do the gardening. No one wanted to put the seeds into the ground and water the plants. Everyone was a god. Everyone was doing all the best that they could, and they began to outdo each other. And this is also in India, in the Tamil cultures, where the gods began to go and fight with the other group of gods to show them that their thunderbolts were better than their thunderbolts. And that precipitates an end of culture scenario. Now, all things being equal, the universe and our positioning in the galaxy and where we are relative to other planets and how everything works is also subservient to the mechanics of nature. So human consciousness also takes on the attributes of destruction. And also, we also contribute to the climate and the changes that we can incur, whether by consciously making it rain, which has happened on so many occasions, or consciously, we also shape the outcome of the weather. So if the weather's really terrible, it's usually the fact that there's so many people behaving in a certain way that is out of alignment with nature. The Chinese were very big on this 5,000 years ago, and they wrote about it. The emperor had to be a conduit of the laws of nature as the high point of the perfection of nature. So if the weather was out of whack and things didn't grow in their proper season, they would be removed or they would be put to death because their agreement with the sky and with the gods was out of whack. So human consciousness and the weather and nature worked hand in hand, and the two did a dance together. This is where the dance of Shiva comes from, by the way. So there are two things going on. And there's one, which is the periodic recycling of nature, of which we are part of. And two, the fact that we pick up on this and we began to also unravel as a culture. And we contribute to that downfall as well. And I've read a couple of articles where in India and also in the Egyptian traditions, that the gods also were partly responsible for laying waste to huge tracts of land and killing a huge amount of people with what looked like aircraft and using all kinds of unusual plasma technology, which sounds like very much like alien technology, but used to actually wipe out other groups of people as well. And just reading the Vedas for what they are, just without any kind of judgment or anything, it does read like science fiction, like Star Wars finally happened here on Earth with these strange Vimana craft flying here and there, dropping these enormous bombs, wiping out everybody, and basically melting your opponents. And I'm thinking, if this was 12,000 years ago or even longer, if these were rudimentary people, they should not have an imagination of that level to come up with that kind of fiction. It had to come from an actual observation of life. Whether they understood it or not is another matter, because some of those stories are quite hard to grab hold of. You always have to have a good glass of wine when you're reading this stuff. But the point is, if they were that rudimentary, they should not have that kind of level of imagination, which is on par with some of the best science fiction we have today. So I'm a big believer in both things were happening. It was both an induced destruction and a periodic destruction as well.
How many civilizations you think have hosted throughout its time?
Oh God, that's a good question. I wish I could answer that one. You know, when I was writing The Missing Lands, which covers a lot of this territory, it was a funny story. I'm good friends with Graham Hancock, who I admire, a great researcher, and
Graham Hancock inspired us to start this podcast.
oh, he inspired me to give up my day job as well. I figured if this guy, and he was already a journalist though, so he had a bit more of a leeway into this, but yeah, if this guy can make a living doing what I really love talking about, I'm going to quit my day job and yeah, leap of faith. So yeah, kudos to him and other people. And I got wind one day over a drink that he was working on a book which sounded exactly like the book I was about to write, but he's never covered the human angle. I thought, okay, I'm already 90% done with the book. I'm going to have to change the whole angle of this. And I focused it on the people, on the gods, and it became a real, totally original book. And he complimented his actually, and we had a joke about it. I said, "Yeah, we're working towards the same end from slightly different points of view. It's good. It validates everybody's stories, and Robert Schoch and people like that as well. So we're all adding to the cake. And one of the chapters involved exactly what you just said. I read a story about a couple of NASA engineers, and they said, well, how do we know that there wasn't a Mesolithic civilization or a dinosaur civilization? But we have to look for these fingerprints of the civilization from their point of view, not from ours. And they actually postulated, and by working with archaeologists who found these anomalous series of burn marks on the Earth's structural field hundreds of thousands of years ago, which suggested that there was some kind of industrial thing going on, a big industrial burn, much more than nature would have accounted for. And he said it shows that there's some things here that there was some kind of level of induced structural analysis that is not natural, that was probably created by some kind of humanoid. You know, how do we know that it wasn't true? Well, the reason we know it was true is also because of the work of Michael Cremo, who wrote a wonderful book called Forbidden Archaeology, which talks about all these objects that were found in strata, which was millions of years old. And I remember one in Oklahoma, which was basically a mosaic, a field of mosaics. They were building a Walmart, of all things, outside of Tulsa, Oklahoma, and they dug about 30 feet for a foundation, and they reached this mosaic floor, which means it was been over 30,000 years old. But, at which time that was a bit of an ocean. Oklahoma was part of an ocean. And they said, well, we brought a geologist in, and one of them said, oh, that's perfectly natural. Yeah, but all the cracks are geometric, and there are holes which are evenly spaced and drilled into the actual mosaics, equidistant from each other. And the measure that was used was the same unit of measure that was later used to build stone circles and megaliths. which survives to this day, by the way, in Peru. It's called a vara. It's called a megalithic yard of 2.72 feet. So this is 30,000 BC. And in the mine just down the road from Tulsa, they also found a kettle, or what looked like a kettle, or some object made out of metal that can hold water embedded in a massive crack of coal, which is over 1 million years old. So now you got a problem right there. So his book is full of all of these incredible uparts, they call them. There was a certain spherical element and also an axe and a metal object that was found again in a coal seam under the North Sea. There was a coal seam that went out from Hull for about 2 miles under the North Sea, and they brought out this enormous piece of coal. They had to break it down because you can't put that piece of coal in your fireplace, and boom, out comes this axe and all of these other parts. So he gets poo-pooed, of course, but well, you can't fake that kind of stuff. It's either real or it's an anomaly. So I really am a big believer that, yes, we have been here before. There's been many cycles of civilization. And again, the Indians, especially in Sri Lanka, they've written about this, and the stories get promulgated from age to age, and they're still available for us to read today.
I'm not sure if Graham Hancock mentioned about this, but I think they found this. Was it a rock or a ring in the Denisovan cave where you can see a hole that's been drilled in? You can
Yeah.
see like the curves into it. And I think that was, they were saying that it was 50,000 years old or something like that. So,
Yeah, and the hole is about, what, 1/16 of an inch, and drilled with such precision
yeah,
that you need to have something vibrating at very fast speed to get that kind of drill. Otherwise, you
exactly.
splinter.
Yeah.
And I think it was greenstone. So greenstone can shatter. So if you're doing a slow drill, it'll just go boom, it'll just break. But if you've got a very high rotary drill, yeah, you can get a 16th of an inch drill and go right through without breaking the actual thing. Beautifully polished. Yes, I remember that story quite well. So again, you have to look at it from the point of view of other people, not from our point of view. Otherwise, we'd be looking for a car or a computer or a bicycle. Yeah, but they probably use something completely different, and that's what the point that the NASA scientist was saying about. You got to look at the actual levels of the ground and find out if there are geological anomalies or things that shouldn't be there geologically, but they may be induced by some kind of humanoid activity.
It's incredible. I think even, I mean, a big smoking gun is the sort of the pots that they found in Egypt that date pre-Denisovan or from that era, and they're all cut to like a incredible precision. And even us working with that level of, or with that stone using primitive tools, we wouldn't be able to. So understanding that is a complete anomaly.
It is crazy, isn't it? I mean, yeah. I mean, I presume you've seen the pots in the Egyptian Museum. So have all this. It is incredible. Usually, I'm not into pots or pottery, but I thought, let's go look at this. I mean, I get stuff in alabaster. I mean, I can go down to the alabaster factory and see them doing it there with basic tools, and they look beautiful. And that's a very, very soft material. But when you see it in basalt and diorite, which is the hardest rock on the planet, and it's
Yeah.
absolutely pristine, you think, wait a minute, how the hell did that happen? Yeah, and I'm completely open-minded as to how it was all created, and it also, they may have been handed down because they found 8,000 of these jars, including plates and other cutlery, at the foundation of the Pyramid of Saqqara. It's 100 feet below the actual building itself. There's a whole city under there, which we actually now have access to. And yeah, they found huge amounts of plates and stuff. And they said, well, even with the guy who it's attributed to, which, by the way, there's 5 pyramids in that pyramid. There's not just one pyramid, but the one pharaoh gets attributed to the whole thing. He built everything. Well, that's not possible. They did actually, in Egypt and around the world, take other people's monuments and they either expand them, or they take the existing monument and they put their name on it. So you got to be careful with that. And I thought, even despite the fact they had big courts back then, and a lot of people, a lot of servants, 8,000 pieces of cutlery and dishes and jars is way over the top to be a practical thing. Maybe they were putting it there for safekeeping from another culture that came before them. That's very plausible.
Just to ask another question, do you believe that there are sort of other forces at play here that gives us sort of more of a sense of distraction from all of this. So maybe there's more of a conscious effort that, because I feel that humans don't necessarily know the potential of what we can do and what we have. And sort of living in accordance with nature, I can't help but to feel that there is a sort of a conscious effort to keep us distracted and away from this information.
I think it's possible. I mean, all things being equal, that the universe is also filled with people who are spiritual and nefarious. Why not? I mean, we have the Greys and all the. I mean, I'm not hugely into UFO studies. I just rub shoulders with them because of my work with crop circles. I hear the stories and I talk to the scientists, and they said, "Yeah, we have the Greys, which are usually the troublemakers, and they're grey because they have no emotion. They keep absconding with human beings, trying to find out where emotion comes from. They're flummoxed by the fact that we are emotional, sentient beings. They have no concept of this. It's like us trying to understand how an animal works by dissecting the animal in the laboratory and sticking pins into living things. We do the same thing too. But there is something here which is always at the back of my mind when we talk about this topic, and that is that there is a rule in the universe called the law of non-intervention, and basically it's the first rule where no culture can intervene in the development of another one, even if it's on another planet. Everyone has a right to self-determination. Now, you can assist if you've been asked for help. You can get an outside agency to come to the planet Earth and say, well, then they've asked for help. A lot of millions of people are crying out for help. So let's suggest some ideas by making crop circles. You'll know this, by the way, because one of the people that was receiving this information was a guy called Gene Roddenberry, who went on to hardwire that information into something called the Prime Directive, which is the foundation of Star Trek. He wraps that whole story of channeling into a space age theme, and that's why people love it. There's a ring of truth about it. So if that was correct, then there is no way another civilization from outside of the Earth can actually interfere in our development, okay? Unless you have given conscious or unconscious permission for them to intervene. Now, that's the way at the door in. And there's a lot of people around here, especially younger souls, who are, they materialize here for the first time, and they don't know what's what. They feel a bit sort of disembodied and all over the place. And this succumb to the darkest attributes of humanity. I would say that probably is where the problems begin. You use people who have no control of their emotional state, who are very young souls, who are here for the first time on their first incarnation, and they basically become a kind of anchor or an attractor for people out there, aliens, let's call them aliens, who think, well, wouldn't it be fun to have some fun with humans and really bugger things up? That I find perfectly plausible as well. If you just stand back without any judgment, look at how the human race develops. Yes, that's absolutely correct. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. I'd have to be. Actually, I'm not really big into abductions. I got better things to do in my life. But once I die, I'll figure it out. I think that's exactly what will happen. I think we only find out if that's true once you actually leave this mortal coil and find out what the big picture is. But it's certainly within the realm of possibility. There's a couple of groups of nefarious people out there flying around, grabbing hold of people here who are less developed and using them as a kind of an anchor to experiment to see how much we can mess things around. And then you got the other group, hopefully us, who are trying to do the right thing. And there's always that balance in life, isn't there? There's always the dark and the light anyway. Because let's face it, if you're here on the planet Earth and you decided to incarnate, you are not perfect. You come here to experiment, to try and improve yourself. And Earth has always been a place of experimentation. And some people come here to build a sandcastle. Some people come here to knock the sandcastle down. It's all about the light and the dark having this wonderful play. And it's not about right or wrong, because light and dark are all perspectives. I mean, if you're a Star Wars fan, I mean, most people love Darth Vader. I mean, he's a dark little bastard, isn't he? But you know what? He was also used to be a light being who got seduced by fear because he was in fear that his wife was going to die at childbirth. The only way he can save his wife is by propaganda from the dark side to say, well, look, you can save your wife if you learn the true nature of the Force, which even the Jedi don't know. So he gets seduced by the dark side. But at the very end, when he meets his son, Luke, There's a little light still inside him, and he opens up. He becomes the person that redeems himself at the very end of death. Yeah, so at the very end, when he finally meets his maker, he finally makes up for all the darkness that he's caused. So it's a big play. And I think the Indians had a very good way to describe it, which is, Kali. It's about the dance of Krishna. And it's about the fact that here we come to play with the dark and the light. And hopefully the more enlightened people amongst us are going to lead the place in a better state. So I think both scenarios are actually plausible.
Do you believe that we can choose to incarnate?
Oh, all the time, absolutely, trillions of times. And I recall one of the channelings where I actually asked this, and by now I'm getting a bit more confident in able to ask the person in the trance what to go for. And I said, so what's this all about? I mean, what is the purpose to all of this? And they said, to have an experience. Are you telling me that the whole meaning of life, apart from 42, if you're a fan of that film, the meaning of life is to have an experience? Yeah, because that's all there is to do in the universe. The nature of every soul is to have another experience. Whether it's a non-physical world, physical world, doesn't really matter. You're relating the information back to the creator, and the creator tries to modify its actions relative on your experience. So I said, well, what happens when you've had so many experiences and you've got the T-shirt, and what do you do? I said, well, you become like us. You become, I wouldn't say an enlightened or a superior being, but we have done this so many trillions of times that even you humans do not have in numbers for many times we've incarnated, but we've done it all. And now we're helping younger souls like yourself up the ladder. And one day you'll be here doing what we're doing as well. I said, that's it? That's the meaning of life? I said, that's it. It's pretty boring, really, isn't it? I said, wow, that's incredible. And it really just brought it all home for me because it made a lot of sense. Once you finish here and you've come here to experiment, you forget where you came from. And here's a strange paradox. So we're here doing these podcasts. We're reading all the right books, watching the videos and touring sacred sites to remind ourselves of all the information that we knew before we incarnated. Isn't that funny? Because we have all the information in our genes, in our memory, but when we incarnate, we forget about it all. We have to start as children again, and we do the best we can. And once in a while, you wake up because of someone you meet or a book that you've read that the synapses start firing and you go, I remember this. And there are people that you've met in your life when you walk around, you go into a room and for no reason, you just want to give them a big hug because you know them. Well, how is that possible if you've never met them before, unless it's a genetic memory? And this is why I believe that the whole thing does work as a kind of a mnemonic device, that you come here to do certain things and you are reminded because of your connections, the people that you meet and the places where you go to that fire up those synapses that helps you remember the purpose why you came here. And then you die, you go back to the collective and you go, well, what shall I do now? Shall I sit on the planet beach for a million years? Shall I become a rock? Yes, you can become a rock if you want. Rocks are sentient beings too. Or shall I go back and fix the things that I messed up? Or maybe I should be the victim of the awful things that I did to certain people. It's your choice, by the way. There's no judgment here. That's a Catholic thing. It's completely misunderstood from ancient systems of knowledge, specifically the Egyptians that said, no, there's a self-assessment that goes on. There are 42 assessors, and you go in front of all of them, the gods, and you have to self-assess. They'll ask you, have you been a good boy? Have you stolen? Be honest. And you go, actually, I stole that thing. Okay, would you like to go back and make amends? Or do you understand where you went wrong? Would you like to have another experience? Now you've got a choice. So there's an infinite amount of experiences that you're going to go through as a soul. And the one thing that they made very clear is that anybody in the other world is part of a collective. You're not truly separate as a soul. You're an entity, but you are tied together with these invisible filaments, every other being in the universe. Trying to get your head around that one. And they said, we envy any soul that has the courage to go to Earth and incarnate in the most densest possible way, because it hurts. Love will either make you a wonderful person or it will kill you. And trust me, I've got plenty of experience on that one. Food will taste even more tactile than it is here in the other world. You can get sushi in the other world, but you don't have a physical body in the same way. It doesn't. You don't get the same experience. Driving, yeah, you can drive in the other world, but here it's much more tactile. Pain is much more tactile. Everything is much more experiential, and you gain experience as a soul in no other way you can anywhere else. But the problem is you are disconnected from the source, and you spend all your life praying, reading the right books, watching the right videos to connect back with us, your teachers and your guides, the watchers or the management, or whatever you want to call them, in order to help you dream the dream awake. And it goes back to the purpose of sacred sites. If you can dream your life, awake, you are living every moment to the best of your ability, and you make the best of your time here, rather than going shopping all the time or wasting your time on social media. It's useful, but moderation is the important thing. The trick is to make yourself aware of the nature of your soul, so that you can make the best of every single experience. And when you go back to the collective, you see. So there's a bit of envy on the other side that we chose to do this, and we're kind of envious of their freedom that they have from all the pain and all the problems that we have down here. But we chose this, and once you accept that, and acceptance is the key to this story. Once you accept that, you have to believe a word I'm saying. Just accept that it's true. 80% of the weight that you're carrying right now will just disappear, because you don't fully understand the whole story yet. Or if you do, well done. You're doing better than most people. But if you don't, accept that you've chosen this for your own improvement, and half of the weight that you're carrying suddenly disappears, and you take responsibility for everything that you do. It's the biggest lesson that I've learned in my life, and it's really useful.
So how do you know your past life mistakes? Because let's just say you die, you go back to the collective, and God, the guardians, or whatever you want to call it, tells you can go and fix the mistakes that you did in your past life, and then you decide to reincarnate. You go back to experience a life and trying to fix the mistakes, correct the mistakes that you've done in the past life. But how do you know that these are your mistakes? What you need to follow?
Well, because everything is naked in the other world. In fact, there's a wonderful mural at Chichen Itza. It's the house of the initiate, where the initiate's sitting there cross-legged, and everything that is below the waist is clothed, but above the waist is naked. Because once you leave your contact with your legs were deemed to be your contact point with the material world, your torso is the upper point which connects to the other world. Your torso was naked because once you've gotten into the other world, everything is revealed. Everything happens at the same time. There is no time in the way that we would perceive it. It's a holographic universe, so everything is still happening. The past is still happening. The future is actually still happening, and the present is still happening. But the brain can't get around that. I mean, you go mad if you try to intellectualize that process. But that's how they would be able to explain it. Except that everything is happening simultaneously on multiple levels of reality, so you can see everything for what it is. And you just tap in, and as soon as your consciousness goes to a certain place to find out, what did I get wrong in this lifetime? And there's a wonderful phrase that says, where your intention goes, energy flows. So your energy as an intention goes to exactly and focuses on those points where things were not quite right. You know damn well that something was quite right. It could be something as simple as, I decided to poison my neighbor's cat. That's just not right. Even if the cat was a complete bastard and it keep pooping on your lawn all the time, well, you train the cat, you move it somewhere else, you stroke it and emphasize it. Go, look, this is not good news. I want you to poop here. See, I'm making you feel better. You don't violate the rules of nature. That's what it really comes down to. So you're able to take your consciousness wherever you want it, to find those things which really don't add up to your true nature, to your real self, and they don't stand you in your. They don't serve you well in any way. So once you get your head around that, you recognize that you can go back and fix things, which then we would think, well, that must influence the present and the future. But somehow in the other world, where everything is holographic, it doesn't. The only way it would happen and have an impact if you fix your past is if you are still alive here, and then you wouldn't even have been born, or somehow you messed about. It's a kind of a Back to the Future kind of moment, isn't it? Where Marty's picture starts disappearing because he's, I think what will become his mother, she's trying to fall in love with him, and he's disappearing because he's not going to be born unless he introduces his friend, become the partner who becomes the partner of his future mother. It's completely convoluted. But the fact is, you're dead already. You're already gone into the other world. It can't influence your life now. It can only influence the actual book of your entire life, which is written in light, as a lot of the mystics say. It's very hard to intellectualize, and I can't say I've made any huge leaps in trying to bring it down to a very simple way of describing it, but I understand it better, if that makes any sense, because I understand that I don't know everything. None of us do. But the concept of a holographic universe, which many quantum physicists are now accepting that that's how actually life actually works. The only way it makes sense is there are 64 different levels of reality happening simultaneously, but we cannot intellectualize that on a mental level because it will drive you insane. So we'll see what happens. If you figure it out, send me an email.
Freddy, thank you so much for coming on. Where can people find more about what you do, everything that you've written? 8 books, 13 documentaries.
Good God, they want more information. Yeah, I have a website. I have about like 8 or 9 books now and about 15 documentaries. So you can find it all and a whole bunch of articles as well in invisibletemple.com.
Invisibletemple.com. Freddy, again, thank you so much for taking the time
Thank you
and coming on.
for the pleasure of being here with you. Yeah, my love.
Freddie, thank you so much.